So, welcome everyone. My name is Colin Kinneborough. I'm an editor at Dissent Magazine, and we're thrilled to be welcoming everyone here for this event. For those of you who don't know, Dissent is a socialist magazine. We've been coming out since 1954, and for all of those 60 years, I would say in one way or another, we've been avid proponents of non-reformist reforms. So I hope we'll be hearing a lot more about two of those tonight. And we'd like to start off by thanking our wonderful hosts, Verso Books, for the space, and also our co-hosts, the New Economy Coalition, who you'll be hearing more about in a second, and Jacobin Magazine for co-sponsoring this event. So thanks so much again to everyone for coming. And here's Kate, who will tell you a little bit more about the New Economy Coalition.
So the New Economy Coalition is a co-host of this event, and I'll spare a sort of boring institutional history, but we'll say that we are a member-based organization, and our members are organizations. We have 122 members doing everything from environmental work, folks like 350 on the other side of this wall, to cooperative development institutes, to think tanks like the Institute for Policy Studies, and really part of the reason we exist is to sort of tie together this work that can be so disparate. That's also part of the intention behind New Economy Week, which is part of what this event is kicking off. And the idea is to have a conversation both about how to get clear about what we don't want, but also how to get clear about what we do. And so that's part of the intention behind this event, is to really start thinking about what does a new economy look like, as fraught and sort of complicated as that term can be, and what are the policies that are going to make it happen. So that's why I'm so excited to have these folks here, and we'll hand it off to Jesse to introduce us.
Great. Hi, everybody. How's everyone doing tonight? Good. I'll take that as just okay. My name is Jesse Meyerson. I'm a writer and an activist from New York City. Maybe you've heard of us. And I'm so pleased to be introducing these three wonderful folks who, in part, I'll spare you that. Anyway, I'll just let you know who they are, and then I'll try and frame the discussion, and then we'll hand it off to them. To my immediate right is Alyssa Battistoni. She is a PhD candidate at Yale and an editor at Jacobin Magazine. To her right, I'm really trying to pull this email up where I have all this written down so I don't have to improvise it, but that was all you wanted said about you, right? Okay. To her right is Pavlina Chernova. She's an associate professor and I believe the chair of the economics department at Bard College, my alma mater. She is also a research scholar at the Levy Economics Institute, housed at that august institution. She specializes in the field of modern monetary theory, fiscal policy, macroeconomic stabilization, and the economics of gender. And then finally, to her right, Derek Hamilton is the director of the doctoral program in public and urban policy at the New School, jointly appointed as an associate professor of economics and urban policy at the Milano School of International Affairs, Management, and Urban Policy at the Department of Economics at the New School for social research at the New School in New York. And that's our group. Can we have a little warm golf applause for them? So that we're super clear, we're talking about a job guarantee and a basic income, and the sides roughly break down the following way. Alyssa tends to write about a basic income, and Pavlina and Derek tend to write about a job guarantee. So that's what people focus on. So I want to just frame this conversation by quoting from a Verso title, which I would recommend very highly to everyone, called The Origin of Capitalism by a wonderful scholar and writer named Ellen Meiksins Wood. Where she details, she sets out to refute the idea that when capitalism started, that opened up market opportunities for people to take advantage of. We've heard that it liberated the bourgeoisie to take advantage of market opportunities. By pointing out, she says that markets existed for thousands and thousands of years before capitalism emerged. So she says that the change wasn't that it opened up market opportunities, but that it subjected all of society to market imperatives. Specifically by taking the masses, away from the direct access that they had to the means of their own subsistence in the figure of the agriculture that they themselves produce, and forced them propertyless to sell their capacity to work, their labor power, for a wage in order to survive. And so she says that this tendency, this dispossession, forced the following market imperatives on all of society: competition, accumulation, and profit maximization, and hence a constant systemic need to develop the productive forces. These imperatives, in turn, fuel the capitalist laws of motion, she says. Capitalism can and must constantly accumulate, constantly search out new markets, constantly impose its imperatives on new territories and new spheres of life, and on all human beings, and on the natural environment. So if those are the capitalist laws of motion, and the socialist project is to arrest that indefinite expansion, then what it has to do is break those imperatives. And it seems clear to me that the way to break those imperatives is to undo that initial dispossession of everybody from the means of their own subsistence by guaranteeing everyone have access to the means of their own subsistence as a matter of guaranteed economic rights, without having to subordinate themselves to the dictates of the market, the job market. So I see these two ideas, a universal basic income and a job guarantee, which you'll hear explanations of in just a moment, as candidate ideas for policies that can hope to achieve something like this: an exit from the private job market, a liberation of the masses from the dictates of the market. I personally happen to believe that neither of the policies is as up to that task as well as they would be together. I think, as I say, that task is sort of like the prime directive for socialists. So we kind of want to tease out a little bit tonight the disagreements between them. They're held up in this format as contending ideas, but hopefully come to a place, hopefully from my perspective, come to a place where we can see that they could be complementary ideas. So with that said, Derek and Alyssa played Rochambeau for it. Alyssa lost, so she will be giving the first presentation. Each person will talk for about 5 to 7 minutes, then I'll ask a bunch of questions, and then we'll turn it over to you guys for questions, yeah? All right, without further ado, Alyssa Battistoni.
Thank you, Jesse, for that introduction, and thank you all for coming out. I'm, as Jesse mentioned, going to be making the case for basic income, and particularly as a key part of a feminist, environmentally sustainable, and just future, which I hope will be redundant one day today. But I also do think, I want to emphasize what Jesse is saying about these not being necessarily, ideas that are necessarily in opposition. I see a lot of, I think, potential for complementary ways of thinking about and using these ideas, and I think that a lot of the sort of questions that come up around them, hopefully, I think as we get into discussion, will, I think, show how much we are talking about shared goals and similar things, and some of it sometimes feels very definitional to me. But anyway, I'll make the case for my sort of UBI case with 4 main points. And so the first thing that I want to talk about is how I think basic income gives workers more power and leverage in general. This is one of, I think, its key attractions, and this is true for both of, I think, for both of these. But I think we see basic income has. This is a way we can connect environmental justice to the labor movement. I think this it gives workers more power to say no to industries that are damaging the environment, their health of communities, which tend to be colors of community and working class communities. People tend to know that the industries that are causing harmful effects are doing that, but don't feel they have any choice. And I think that a basic income is one way to start offering alternatives. The second goes, again, to this sort of to the link between production and consumption, which I think Jesse's comments also framed. And so I think you see in discussions of environmentalism a lot of discussion about overconsumption, the need to cut back, and so on. And I think that can easily tip into the language of austerity, particularly when it's not connected to the flip side of thinking about production and the sort of vicious cycle of production and consumption that is currently required, where you need to sort of you need to produce to be able to consume, but they need to be able to consume enough to keep the economy going so that there are enough jobs for everyone. And I think that while it's understandable that that hasn't been the focus of a lot of environmentalist rhetoric, it's been, a lot of sort of past campaigns that did sort of set up this jobs versus environment dichotomy, and obviously the green jobs discourse as a way to try to avoid that. But I think that there's an argument to be made for trying to reclaim a sort of job-killing environmentalism that's not against work or workers per se, but against just creating jobs for their own sake. And so I think on this note, there's like a lot of things obviously that need to be done. The sort of green jobs initiative, or the idea behind green jobs as being sort of a way to provide work for people as we are trying to do the things we need to do to transition to a sustainable society, which tend to be things like infrastructural and industrial type of stuff, building light rail or, solar panels or whatever. I think there are clearly many things that need to happen in this particular realm and in many other kinds of work. And I think this is one place that we can see the connections between basic income and job guarantee. But I also think that part of the what we should be thinking about is not just sort of, I guess, this particular kind of green job that, again, is a sort of tends to be in I guess, more like blue-collar jobs for a green society, but that is thinking about different kinds of work that are less resource-intensive forms of social reproduction, and so we might call it like pink-collar jobs for a green society or something like that. But things like, I think both nursing and care work and teaching and things like this, but also like the broader work of I think social reproduction, which some of these things are obviously already jobs. We can create jobs doing them, but I think that the line between what is a job and what is not can be very blurry. And I think that one way to recognize the work that, or the many kinds of work that go into social reproduction without simply making every social interaction a job or a set of tasks, and that kind of provides the space to orient us towards different kinds of, different kinds of work is, basic income is one way to start doing that. And at the same time, I think it's not enough just to sort of transition to different kinds of work. We also should just be working less. And I think both in terms of individual well-being, people, when they actually have a choice to work less rather than having the sort of leisure forced upon them in the form of or underemployment, people tend to like working less when they can. And a number of studies have shown this is also a way to, reduce energy use and things like this. So I think there's a way that we can see working less as not only good for us, but good environmentally. And on this note, I think, I guess I'm going to transition to the next two pieces, which are more political in nature. One is that I think a basic income suggests new visions of the good life and of what we can aspire to. And I think that that's a life that can be sustainable but not austere, where we are working less but also have more time to do the things that make life worthwhile. One of the really famous papers about basic income is called Why Surfers Should Be Fed. And it's saying, surfers may not be productive in the sense of, I guess, a sort of traditional sense of, they're not like contributing to society in some obvious way. But I think that, I guess what I'm arguing is that maybe not just that we should feed surfers, but that maybe more of us should be surfers. I think that recognizing the way that things like low carbon leisure, as one of our attendees has put it, can be a way to live a life that is, again, a sort of rich and full life, but that is not necessarily as focused on sort of material consumption, is one of the ways that we might start to think about using basic income. And finally, I guess on a more politically pragmatic note, I think that basic income offers some exciting political possibilities. not just because it appeals to people of different ideological persuasions, as has often been said. There's the sort of point that libertarians also like basic income and things like this, which I think is actually a danger zone. And Jesse has written about this in a way that I think is really good. But because I think it can pull together a wider swath of the left that brings together, a coalition of employed people, unemployed people, underemployed people, can assert that people who have been marginalized and criminalized for being underemployed are in fact can be at the forefront of this kind of organizing. And I think also has a lot of traction internationally, interestingly. I think this is a place where we see, basic income has been getting a lot of attention internationally, and also not just in industrialized democracies. While some of the high-profile programs are in, wealthy European countries, there have been pilots in, I think Switzerland is voting on one. There have been various proposals, but there's a lot of growing momentum and trial programs in Namibia and places in Southern Africa, and places where there is very high unemployment rates and not much hope for, growth, just creating enough jobs for everyone. So I think that this is a place that we can start to look at emphasizing the universal alongside the basic income, and so bringing a sense of, universal provision and thinking about international solidarity in new ways. And so I guess those are the four main points I want to make for now. But before I close, I want to, just close my opening remarks with words from two of my favorite quotes on basic income, which are not basic income, but I guess the idea of it. It's famously been supported by a lot of people, from Nixon to Martin Luther King Jr. But my favorite writer on this sort of idea is Virginia Woolf, who in A Room of One's Own reflects on the instinct for possession, the rage for acquisition, which keeps the stockbroker and the great barrister going indoors to make money and more money and more money, when it is a fact that 500 pounds a year will keep one alive in the sunshine. And I think that this sort of task, staying alive in the sunshine, is the one before us. And I think figuring out how to get that, 500 pounds a year or whatever it may be for us now is what both, all of us here are trying to figure out. And I guess my final closing words come courtesy of Beyonce. All the people on the planet working 9 to 5 just to stay alive. How come? So.
Should point out before we move to Professor Hamilton that Alyssa's essay entitled "Alive in the Sunshine" in Jacobin Magazine is there for free on the internet. So check that out if you guys have the internet.
All right, so today I'm going to talk a lot about the framing of inequality, and then federal job guarantee is going to be a mechanism to deal with this framing, inequality. A lot of my conversation is going to be focused on black-white differences. So black-white differences become most evident to address the discourse, because that's where the discourse is most directed. But one can generalize and see that it's not only a question of black-white, but this neoliberal, post-racial discourse of individual actions leading to the results in one's life is pervasive, but most evident with blacks. I'm also going to frame a lot of this in terms of Barack Obama, who I think is he is the leader, at least for another year, of this phase of post-racialism and neoliberalism. Okay. So the conventional discourse about racial disparity is a myth. It is a myth upheld by Democrats, Republicans, blacks, and whites alike. In fact, it's a narrative that the nation's first black president has been advancing long before he even became president. At the 2004 Democratic National Convention, then candidate Barack Obama, actually before he was candidate Barack Obama, Illinois Senator Barack Obama, put forth a keynote address about harmony, bringing together red states, blue states, liberals and conservatives, and he mentioned race once. And when he mentioned race, he did it in the following context. He said, quote, "Go into any inner city neighborhood and folks will tell you government alone can't teach kids to learn. They know that parents have to teach. that children can't achieve unless we raise their expectations, turn off the television sets, and eradicate the slander that says a black youth with a book is acting white. They know these things. So again, it's important that if we really want to enact any of these policies, that the conversation has to change. All right, so Obama uses this occasion of his first national platform to single out and chastise black youths and their families as the cause of their own underachievement. Obama reiterated these themes in his 2004 keynote, More Perfect Union. This is when he was candidate Barack Obama. He says, quote, for the African American community, the path to a more perfect union means embracing the burdens of our past without becoming victims of our past. It means continuing to insist on a full measure of justice in every aspect of American life. But it also means binding our particular grievances for better health care, better schools, and better jobs to the larger aspirations of all Americans. The white woman struggling to break the glass ceiling, the white man who's been laid off, the immigrant trying to feed his family, and it means taking full responsibility for our own lives. If we fast forward 7 years to his 215th State of the Union address, and this will be my last Obama quote for the night, the talking points remain the same, but rather than referencing Jeremiah Wright, he now references the Black Lives Matter movement. He says, quote, I want our actions to tell every child in every neighborhood, your life matters, and we are committed to improving your life chances as committed as we are to working on behalf of your own kids. I want future generations to know that we are a people who see our differences as a great gift, and that we're a people who value the dignity and worth of every citizen, man and woman, young and old, black and white, Latino, Asian, immigrant, Native American, gay, straight, Americans with mental illness or physical disability. Everybody matters. So at best, Obama misunderstands the Black Lives Matter message, and at worst, he attempts to co-opt it altogether. Obama's rhetoric, along with the voluminous, dominant discourse on race, has remained remarkably consistent. It emphasizes the same basic points, that in the aftermath of the civil rights movement, America has largely transcended its racial divide, and that whatever racial disparities remain are overwhelmingly the result of self-sabotaging actions or inactions on the part of blacks themselves. Hence, policy becomes oriented towards rehabilitation of black families, and the logic of austerity reigns. Why fund government agencies and programs that invest misallocated resources to irresponsible individuals and, at worst, create dependencies that further fuel irresponsible behaviors? Or instead of austerity, we end up with policies like My Brother's Keepers. These are policies which ignore the plight of young black women altogether and attempt to incentivize so-called defective black males, young black males, to be more employable rather than addressing the discriminatory labor market conditions that they continue to face. All of these policies are consistent with a neoliberal orthodoxy, both its focus on individuals and its faith in the free market. The underlying assumption is that as long as individual agents are properly incentivized, the market offers solutions to all problems, economic or otherwise. The ascendancy of blacks to the most elite positions of society are often put forth to make the case of this grand racial progress. These cases of black exceptionalism are meant to serve as examples of what individual or familial acts of perseverance and hard work can achieve. The problem with these convenient anecdotes is that they're self-fulfilling, and they lack the systematic use of proper counterfactuals to empirically validate or invalidate their conjecture. We know nothing about all those individuals who did work hard and do all the quote right things and didn't achieve success in the labor market, for instance. Moreover, over the past 40 years, regardless of education, the black unemployment rate has remained roughly twice as high as the white rate. There's been only 1 year, 2000, in which the black unemployment rate has dipped below 8%. In contrast, there's only been 4 years in which the white rate has superseded 8%. Thus, if 8% is a demarcation of calamity, blacks are in a perpetual state of unemployment crisis. These disparities are even larger when we examine wealth. In fact, wealth becomes the main tool to dispel the post-racial narrative. We know what wealth can buy in our society. We know that wealth can buy you access to a great education. It can buy you access to a job. It can buy you political influence. It can buy you a ticket out of jail. So blacks and Latinos make up about 30% of the population, but own about 5% of the nation's wealth. When it comes to liquid assets, assets that can be readily converted into cash, black and Latino families are nearly penniless. The typical black and Latino family respectively have $200 and $340 in liquid assets. If we exclude retirement savings, the black liquid asset rate, what they have in the bank, is $25. Okay? So in spite of these enormous disparities in capital stocks, discourse has focused primarily on education as the driver of upward mobility. The presumption is that if blacks were more responsible, made better financial decisions, and were more focused on education, they could get a good job and they could have a pathway towards economic security. So there's a report that I co-authored with William Sandy Darity, Ann Price, Vishnu Sridharhan, and Rebecca Tibbett, in which we titled Umbrellas Don't Make It Rain, Why Studying Hard and Working Hard Isn't Enough for Black Americans. And in this report, we demonstrate that black families whose head graduated from college have $10,000 less wealth than white families where the head dropped out of high school. It's also noteworthy that a good job is not the great equalizer either. Income-poor white families have more wealth than middle-income black families. And the typical white family whose head is unemployed has nearly twice the wealth of a typical black family whose head is employed full-time. By the way, if you're in a black family where the head is unemployed, you have zero wealth. In essence, education is not the antidote for the enormous racial gap in wealth and employment. None of this is intended to diminish the value of education. There's clear intrinsic value, along with a public responsibility to expose every child to a high-quality education from grade school through college. I'm going to skip this other report that we have that demonstrates it's not a question of investment in education, because black families invest more with less when it comes to higher education. There are huge disparities in the wealth of black families who contribute to their child's education towards college than whites. I can cite you some enormous statistics, but I'll be fair to my panelists and not go through it. Okay. All of this directly follows from the neoliberal, post-racial perspective where the free market, as long as individual agents are properly incentivized, is supposed to be the solution for all our problems. The transcendency of Barack Obama becomes the ideal symbolism and the spokesperson for this perspective. His ascendancy becomes an allegory of hard work, merit, efficiency, social mobility, freedom and fairness, individual agency, and personal responsibility. Perhaps the greatest rhetorical victory of this paradigm is convincing the masses that implicit in unfettered markets is the American dream. The hope that even if your lot in life is subpar, with patience, individual hard work, you can turn your proverbial rags into riches. The reality is that policy needs to look beyond individual factors and investigate structural factors that preserve the relative status of dominant groups via intergenerational resource transfer as well as other exclusionary policies. To address the tenacious problem of inequality, we need a bold solution. One such policy is one that William Darity and I, along with Alan Aha and Daniel Bustillo, have advanced, and that's a federal job guarantee. It would go a long way towards addressing racial disparities and building a more inclusive U.S. economy. It would offer the economic security of a living wage to all its citizens. Beyond physical infrastructure investments, like better transportation, like clean jobs, or clean energy, green jobs, clean energy, that we so desperately need, it also would offer much needed investments in human capital infrastructure as well, like building new schools, like providing new hospitals, like the arts. It would also offer the potential to give every American high quality child care so that both genders have the ability to go to work without being burdened with child care. I don't mean to say burdened with child care. All right. I did say it. I shouldn't have. I don't have any kids, maybe that's what it is. right? So this public investment would provide tremendous economic benefit to the private sector as well. The Works Progress Administration and Civilian Conservation Corps under the New Deal provide historical precedent where we had a great push in public sector works that stimulated the U.S. economy. The federal job guarantee would set an implicit floor on wages. It would curtail our need for minimum wage reform. It would set a minimum floor on employers providing health care provisions, as well as any number of working conditions that are improvements for what workers have. It would contend with the private sector would have to contend with a federal job guarantee to attract workers, so it provides a minimum floor. It would dramatically reduce the need for all those things I mentioned, like minimum wage, for instance. Okay, and it would, here's perhaps the most important part, it would empower workers so that they can bargain in their everyday lives by removing the threat of unemployment, which pretty much leaves workers at the mercy of employers, that threat of being destitute by unemployment. So the deafening neoliberal post-racial discourse has defined fiscal budget reduction and economic growth, which often are ironically at odds with each other, as the nation's economic priorities, while economic equity, fairness, and human capabilities have become a distant backseat. We need to change that discourse. A federal job guarantee would also be a major step in drowning out that rhetoric and instead providing all Americans with the tangible dignity and economic security of a productive job.
All right. So we're going to hear from Professor Chernova now, and she's an expert in public financing, so she'll tell you a little bit about like how we would pay for something like a job guarantee. But I also want to ask, because when you say a federal job guarantee, it sounds to a lot of people like it's a centralized program picking out where jobs are going to be and what the work's going to be, and that's kind of alienating to a lot of people. But Professor Chernova has a different, more locally governed version of a job guarantee that she articulates, so I'm going to ask you if you could sort of include a little bit about that vision.
Yes, no, thank you very much for the invitation, and just really enjoyed the previous remarks. I think what I'd like to do is I do want to talk about how we finance these programs. Like, we have to address the issue of the macroeconomics of these policies, because at the end of the day, we want them to do what we ask them to do. And so I have been working a lot on the job guarantee, but my interest in the program is really to rethink this program as an institutional vehicle for achieving certain socioeconomic objective. And so I come to the table as a friend of the basic income because we share so many goals. I also come as a friendly critic of the basic income, and a very particular basic income proposal, just from the point of view of my macroeconomic training and my work on public financing. So the few main points that I want to make are the following, that the job guarantee actually ends up fulfilling the objectives that the basic income has, and the basic income as defined in the literature, the pure proposal actually has significant drawbacks, and it doesn't really provide income security. So that's the argument I want to run through. Now, I need to qualify this. I've been talking to friends from the basic income guarantee networks from academia for the last 15, 20 years, and we've been engaged in this dialogue. And the issue is how do we eliminate economic insecurity, but also my interest is how do we build a road to participation. So which is the model, what do we want from the basic income? What is the program that we're going to envision? The program that I've been critical of is the one that is permanent, that is universal, that is unconditional, and that provides living standard income to anyone, rich or poor. Okay, so I'm literally talking about the program that will provide $20,000 a year to every citizen in the United States. I sympathize with the motivation behind it, but I think the macroeconomics will work against the model. Okay, so in part of my work, I study monetary systems, and one of the things that I'm interested in is to talk about government spending by using the correct quote-unquote paradigm. We can't buy into the neoliberal economic theory of governments being short of financial resources and they can't achieve their objectives. The very, very basic premise, and this alone is a whole topic of discussion that is, it takes a while to flesh out, but the very basic premise is that modern economies are fiat economies. They use fiat currencies. And in modern economies, the fiat currency is a public monopoly. It's a basic, simple public monopoly. So the very argument that the government cannot fund a policy priority doesn't make sense, even on the face of it. Whenever there's a policy priority, governments that have sovereign control over their own currencies always achieve them. We have institutions like the Treasury and the Fed that coordinate and make whatever is necessary to finance those programs. So, in other words, financing for the government, which is the monopoly issuer of the currency, is never a problem. Now, a lot of people are saying, what are you saying? Are you just saying we roll on the printing presses and let's just spend? That's not what I'm saying. I'm saying that the way government spends is spent in its own resource. Right? You and I have to earn the dollar. States have to tax the dollar. The federal government does not. The federal government provides the dollar. So that alone takes a while to sort of absorb and the implications of this. But we need to talk about federal funding and the proper way. So the good news is that we can fund the programs. Right? Right, that's the good news. The financing is not the question. The bad news is that we have a currency system that's a fiat currency system where we have to worry about what that currency can buy. What's the value of that currency? And so policy then has to think about how government provides that currency so that it doesn't erode its value. Okay, so the simplest way that I can explain this is that basic income, just the policy of sending everybody a check in the mail for $20,000, very easy policy, kind of like Social Security, right? It's very easy, but that alone provides money for nothing, right, in and of itself. And I know I don't want to use sort of the neoliberal, frames that we don't value human life. I really don't mean that. What I mean is that normally, currency is provided in exchange for real goods and services. And the public spending, in a sense, sets a conversion rate, if you will, between what the currency can buy and the stuff that is produced out there in the public and the private sector. Okay? So the basic distinction between these two policies is that in one instance, the money is quite literally free. In the other, it is in exchange for something. And what is that something? So that's where I'm very interested in talking about what do we want for that money, right? The job guarantee, by providing a wage, a $10 wage, let's say, you can say that, every dollar is what, six minutes of work or something like that, right? So in a sense, you're situating the power of the currency in labor power. And I think that's a powerful thing, that you are, what your money is worth, exactly, of 6 minutes of socially useful work. And that's what the job guarantee connects these two things. All of the objectives of the basic income guarantee, of the provisioning of the inadequate public resources and services, etc. The job guarantee can do that by anchoring the value in the currency in people. So I have an article that makes the case that the pure version of the basic income guarantee can be inflationary and potentially even hyperinflationary, which really is a disservice to precisely the people that we're trying to help. Part of the issue is opting out of the labor market, right? That's one of the objectives. But at the same time, the decommodification of labor is not a sufficient condition, not even necessary, I think, for the erosion of capitalism. And we're still embedded in a capitalist system within which we have to buy things. And so what ends up happening is that, many of us would opt out, but we will still, in one way or another, have to consume with that basic income. And you could see how, without changing the current power relations, production power relationships, you can have firms simply raise prices and extract part of that basic income in the form of profit. So what I worry is that what would the basic income policy do? If people are opting out, if supply is shrinking, but demand has increased because we all have now more purchasing power, right? That in and of itself should cause inflation. Okay. If, however, the employer has to coax people back into the labor market, right? All of these, fast food workers now are getting $20,000 a check. Why would they leave their kids, and go to work instead of stay at home, right? So you could potentially have this mass exodus, which is what we want. But at the same time, you've reduced supply. So if the employer wants to coax them back into the labor market, you have to increase wages, which is a good thing. And maybe you have to increase wages and add benefits because, you have to beat that $20,000 income, right? But then your hamburger is not going to be $3, it's going to be $30. So suddenly the income that we determined will give you your standard of living doesn't buy you the standard of living. Things are more expensive for rent, for food, and other stuff. So the basic income has not guaranteed you the minimum life, and we as policy, committed to this policy, have to increase the basic income. So now the basic income is $25,000, maybe $30,000. So now the $30,000 bad jobs are experiencing this process. So in a sense, it's doing what we wanted to do, like eliminate bad jobs and have firms kind of increase wages, but it's doing it by a mechanism that erodes the purchasing power of the basic income. So you can have like a constant vicious spiral that is like a never-ending catch-up game. How do we deal with inflation in the modern world? Modern economies keep unemployment. They use unemployment to fight inflation. Essentially, they reduce people's income, they keep them hungry so they can't buy the stuff. Okay? Now, we don't want that. And what unemployment does is a counter-cyclical problem. When there is inflationary pressures, right, we lay off a lot of people. When there are deflationary pressures, we try to hire people, we give them unemployment insurance, right, just to keep them alive, right? So there is a counter-cyclical spending mechanism that tames inflation. The job guarantee has this virtue that's the counter-cyclical spending. That when the economy is not doing well and people have lost even their good private sector jobs, they go in the public sector program where they get that income, but they are producing social useful output. So I'll get to that point. So when the economy is shrinking, the job guarantee is expanding. When the economy is expanding, the job guarantee could be shrinking because people are moving to better paid jobs as the private sector demands those people. So you have a counter-cyclical mechanism, taming mechanism of inflation that does not exist in the basic income. So I don't want to be too technical into that stuff, but I think that these two aspects are quite important in the way these programs function. So to me, it is not at all a problem for us to marry the two proposals where we can say, here is an institution that values labor, that values social useful work, environmentally friendly jobs, and here's a program that puts the social motive ahead of the profit motive. And we will guarantee you a living income for that job. Are you ready and willing to work? Would you like income for the public purpose? Here it is. I recognize that not everybody can participate in this program, and there has to be some sort of income support for people for one reason or another cannot participate. And we may value those kinds of activities. Policy could explicitly state, okay, we want to support stay-at-home moms, and therefore we will provide unconditional income. They don't have to come and earn, right, their wage in a sense. So we can recognize that certain groups of people will not want to work or should not work and complement the employment program, or the income from socially useful work with income that is guaranteed. So basically, I just want to, there are a lot of things that I want us to discuss here, but I do see job guarantee as that institution. It's that vehicle that brings people together. It is that vehicle that is attempting to fill social need, to begin building what is a very eroded social fabric in the United States, quite frankly, right? There are so many things that need to be done, and there are so many people that can do them. And so the job guarantee is the coordinating mechanism. It also recognizes work versus leisure. It kind of sets the standard of what a good job is. And the private sector has to match the pay package, the leisure, the vacation package. And the same dynamic we then get to experience with private sectors meeting or rather losing their workers from bad jobs because there is a public option of a good job. And finally, I just want to emphasize that last point is that you have to change property rights. If you want to, if that's the issue, if the issue is capitalism, you have to change property rights. It's not, just allowing people not to work is not going to do anything if property rights are not changed. Capital is consolidated, it's concentrated, market power has been determined. I think that people would be marginalized if there aren't other enormous reforms to undermine capitalism. That's the goal. But the job guarantee can create wealth and assets for people. You can use your cooperatives, you can use whatever other arrangements to create wealth. And I'll stop here. Thank you.
Excellent. Okay, let me problematize some of those things for you. Alyssa, the sort of most seductive claim in your advocacy for the basic income, for me, from an environmental perspective, is that it takes pressure off of constantly having to keep up production and consumption, more jobs, more consumption, and that these are like major polluters. But I wonder if we're thinking of, like, let's say we have both. Let's say that there's a job guarantee and then there's also a not $20,000, but like $5,000 basic income as just sort of an income support to provide people with the means of making leisure. Doesn't that increase consumption? Now we have
possibly. Yeah, I mean, I don't think that that basic income is going to is like the silver bullet for decreasing consumption. I think what is important about it in this sort of context is I guess I think taking pressure off or challenging the notion that only people who do produce can consume, but then I think breaking this link in the cycle. Like, I don't think that necessarily basic income, I think, will reduce consumption. I think it's, totally possible that there are ways of providing. I mean, I think part of the point of basic income is to allow people who don't have access to work to consume, right? Like, it is about, I don't think all consumption is bad either. Like, I don't want this to be a sort of not a sort of an argument for austerity or for saying that, nobody should consume anything. And I think certainly we need to figure out how plenty of people, and I think this is particularly for the international argument, how to support consumption for a lot of people, regardless of whether or not they have access to work. But I think that, it's more directed at, I think, again, breaking the sort of I guess the producerist element of what we think of as how consumption is possible. And then I think the way that becomes a form of sort of consumption blackmail, where you have to consume to create jobs and you have to grow the economy to create jobs, and sort of jobs or job-oriented growth becomes the driving force of a lot of social policy, I think. And I think that doesn't necessarily have to be the case. I mean, I think one of the questions about job guarantee is that I think a lot of it comes down to is like how we are defining a job. Like, what is a job? What is work? And I think that this is often really like the sticking point, and not even the sticking point. It's just sort of like how people are seeing things differently. But I think there are versions of a job guarantee that could just kind of continue as sort of jobs as in that sort of creating jobs because we need to grow the economy, and jobs are sort of are the end towards consumption, and there's a way that could also be oriented differently. But yeah, so I think
Bullshit jobs.
yeah, bullshit jobs, right? So I think, and yeah, so it's not like a silver bullet. It is not necessarily going to reduce consumption in all cases, and I think there are no silver bullets on sort of environmental stuff. So I guess I'll leave it at that.
Good, okay. I have some political questions, keeping in mind that you two are both economists and public policy scholars and not politicians or political strategists. But in thinking about the sort of the racist assumptions and racist ideology that kind of buttresses oligarchic political movements, like I'm thinking about the main place when I think about President Obama's sort of class villainy is in education reform. And it's such a bald-faced attempt to shift public resources into private ownership and control. But the way that that's done is through the sort of mobilizing, motivating image is of like a lazy public school teacher who doesn't care about the kids, who just is living high off the hog on the public dime. You know, this like super racist, sexist idea that's kind of at the core of the political movement that is specifically like this class-based movement. So I wonder, I can't even like really fathom, I can like barely fathom the amount of right-wing, especially racist politics that we would come up against in a serious political struggle for one of these or both of these policy ideas. So I wonder what your thoughts are in terms of overcoming that. I mean, we never successfully have.
So we may find allies when we don't think we have allies. In a lot of ways, the federal job guarantee is a conservative idea, right? It's one emphasizing work. And then if we think about basic income, I think one of the key points that came up from Pavlina is that we need a progressive component to it. By just making it non-progressive, it can be inflationary, and it might enrich employers in the sense that you're just providing them stimulus and they own the means of production. So if we are going to have a progressive component to basic income, that's not very different from a conservative negative income tax, right? So conservatives have proposed that. Milton Friedman was one of obviously what we have in mind is different than the amount that he had in mind, but
Charles Murray, for crying out loud.
Yeah, so I think if we're able to shift the conversations, right, the ideas themselves aren't so liberal, right? So we're talking about things that conservatives may be able to latch on. I mean, that's the short answer. The long answer is that it's not a Republican or Democratic idea. It's as if we went through a shift, right? So we're economists. When economists shifted from a political economy discipline to one of a science, economic science, the orthodoxy of the market became almost dogmatic or religion that it's not even questioned. If we're allowed to question the discipline and talk about political economy in a sense that what is the best thing to leverage human capabilities in conversations like that, then I think we have a shot at the policies. Until we change that, we don't have a shot because it seems like foolishness.
Okay, so I'm always very cautious about how you frame the question. I don't even think I'm framing it the right way. I use frames that you associate with, conservative thinking, neoliberal thinking. But I agree that we gotta look for allies. But I don't think we should sell ourselves short and try to show how our program really fulfills what a conservative, like the punitive features of the program that a conservative may want. Like somebody may say, you'd better show that you're disciplined and you come to work and you're fired, we take away your right, your basic right. because X, Y, and Z. I mean, there is quality control. There can be various ways of doing this, but we don't want it to be workfare. That's number one. Okay.
Can you just define workfare a little bit?
Workfare is when you take away somebody's unemployment insurance and they show that ask them to demonstrate they're deserving. This is what the UK did with young people, like youth support, income support, basic income. They told them, okay, you've been unemployed for too long, get off the couch and go find a job, or come and work here for us. Otherwise, we take away your unemployment insurance. That's not.
We did it here in New York City.
Right. Yeah.
With menial jobs, right? We're not talking about menial jobs. We're talking about productive jobs.
So
the New Deal was fair work. Like, we believed that people just did not have the opportunity to work, and we guaranteed it in that sense. So that's number one. But in terms of political strategy, there are a couple of ways that I think about this. The first thing is to show that people are already in the public sector. The mass fallout of unemployment is we pay for it. We pay for it with erosion of the social fabric, of our environmental destruction, with so all the socioeconomic problems that are related to unemployment. We just have a welfare state that pays for unemployment and the associated costs. It's very expensive. So you can, in terms of human life, in budgets, if that's what you're concerned with, right? So I just say there's a better way of doing it by valuing human life, by valuing social production. So that's, I think, the first thing. There's another strategy, though, in the U.S. I'm not sure it's going to work. Is the human rights strategy? In India they passed a job guarantee on the basis of a basic human right. We recognize that everybody should have guaranteed access to a job, and we have a law. So they're trying to really attack this program, but it's kind of hard. Once you enshrine it into law, then you kind of have to make you've made a commitment, and you have to then make it workable.
How is that program going in India? It's a country that I think of as being quite poor, or many people.
And it's enormous, right?
Yeah, it's huge.
I mean, talk about an intractable
there's
problem.
that picture of the globe, and they have a little circle that gets like most of India and China, and that's like 60% of the global population.
Exactly. I mean, talk about it. So yeah, you will find many critics of the program, but the program is relatively young. But there are studies that are coming out that are showing the benefits it has on people who are participating. So it's a little difficult in terms of the states in the challenges to create those jobs. So they're kind of delaying. They're not always creating the jobs, even though they are guaranteed. The payments are not coming. So actually, India is innovating and making a payment system that directly debits the recipient. So it's kind of like a basic guarantee. But then they have to also provide the job opportunity, right? When people go to the municipality. But some studies are showing, a student of mine was doing research on this, that, for example, the wage differential between men and women shrunk as a consequence of the program, and there was a compression at the lower end of wages as well between men and women in the private sector as well. There's another study also that, actually there are two studies on small environmental effects, the projects, in terms of like water projects and reforestation projects, some small infrastructure investment projects in the poorest of the poorest communities. So I think there's a lot more that we can look to. Number one, they need to really improve the program to provide jobs for all, and then study it.
Can I ask you a little bit about the politics too? Because obviously the same question arises. I mean, the big impediment that I could see to getting a basic income is people's objection to giving black people free money. I mean, like that's like the major anxiety of a huge amount of this country. So I want to ask about that, but I also want to highlight a thing about a basic income that Dr. King emphasized in his advocacy of it, which is that it gives free money to black people, which is to say that it provides people who are struggling for justice cash to devote to that cause. So that it, in a sense, once the program is implemented, it then sets you up for further, more radical transformation. So I guess I want to ask about the prospects for strategy behind talking about and advancing a basic income, and then what you foresee, if we imagine that that's some kind of transitional program toward a more socialist economy, what you see as the sort of the fallout or the next step.
Yeah, it's a good question. I think that a couple of things tend to come up in the politics of basic income, and one of them is what Derek raised about there being a lot of right-wing support for basic income, so there's a sort of suspicion of, well, if Milton Friedman liked it, can it possibly be okay? There are versions of basic income that are very, that I wouldn't support, that are, like the sort of give a check and that's it, to erode the rest of the welfare state that we have. That's when basic income and I part ways. The other one is obviously the sort of America will never give, in general, people money for free. I think, yeah, you're right, especially Black people, money for free. There's a lot of the sort of, and people of color and women, or working class people in general, don't deserve money for free. And, the work ethic of America in particular is very, very strong and very racialized. So I think, that is, I think, a major challenge. But I think also, so I guess I have a couple of things that I think here. One is that I do look to, I think that there are also places to look for, maybe political inspiration to organizations like the National Welfare Rights Organization, which is led mostly by Black women fighting for benefits and rights, and for dignity during particularly the Reagan era, when we start to see, especially the rhetoric of things like welfare queen emerging and being established. And it is not my term to reclaim, but I would love for welfare queen to be reclaimed as a term that is not
spelled K-W-E.
yeah, or something. I don't know. I mean, there's it's obviously a myth with very derogatory intention, but I think that the idea of living decently without working too hard is not a bad one. So I think that looking to working class women of color who have organized to stop things like workfare, to protect welfare rights, and to say that we do deserve this, and to sort of reject the sort of stuff around who are the deserving poor, is at least a sort of a resource for sort of thinking about politics and who is at the center of it. But also I think this is where the universal comes in, and universal programs tend to just generate a lot more support than means tested ones. And I think that as I said, there's sort of between unemployed people, underemployed people, and even employed people who realize that, I think maybe feel less secure in that perpetual employment. That's another potential. I think there is, the potential to sort of organize very broadly, and to link, I think a lot of left politics tends to be about organizing workers, and the unemployed, we should try to get them employed somehow. But I do think basic income provides some resources for linking organizing of the unemployed and connecting unemployed people to people who do have jobs, or who maybe have jobs that are not sufficient in some way. So I think that's a little vague, but I think there's some potential there. And I guess the last part is the sort of the visionary element of it that I think is the third. I sort of pointed out two things that people always say about basic income, and the third is well, that's just never. It's just sort of utopian to envision a world of working less, and it probably is at this moment. I don't actually think that basic income is probably going to pass tomorrow, and we will all sort of have time for what we will and all of this immediately. But I think that actually when you talk about it to people, I've been sort of surprised at how much it does resonate, the sort of desire to have, I think to contribute socially and to do the things that I think actually Job Guarantee is also aiming for, but also to have time for what we will, to have real freedom, as another advocate of basic income has put it, to have support to choose one's own life. And so I think that utopian though it may be, and I am not an economist, I'm a political theorist, so take that for what you will. I think trying to talk about what what futures we do want for ourselves and collectively, and trying to just envision like how our working and non-working lives could be different is like a place to at least see some potential in basic income. And I guess the very last point I'll make is that I think that this is a US-specific discussion that we've mostly been having, but I think, internationally, there are a lot of places where most people actually are unemployed. And so, actually the political power is much more behind something like basic income. And there's some, I think, very interesting politics around, distributive politics around things that are around the idea of basic income, and in places where, being unemployed is not the exception, but in fact the norm. And that might be another place to look for how to, what kinds of political organizing and strategy are possible, or what kinds of rhetoric people there are using and things like that. So.
I think that you're right that the sort of utopian aspect is it is a turn on to people. You can see once they get their heads around everybody gets a check, that it's very exciting to people. It makes for a better meme, I think, than a job guarantee in that way. I think that I showed this recently in a study that I did that was extremely scholarly. It was a Twitter poll. Probably make the public policy scholars over here bristle, but I was like, yeah, what do you want? Fight. The text was fight. Job guarantee, basic income. Basic income won hugely, and
They're all your followers.
I don't. Yeah, well, I have followers on both sides. Thank you. So I guess I wanted to ask you about that. I think. Let me add one more thing into the mix. One thing that I think appeals to a basic income, especially among young people, who perhaps like me, have never had a staff job anywhere with a salary and benefits. I mean, I just go from project to project, temporary employment, contract work here and there. That's kind of the economy that we live in, and I like that kind of freedom. And a basic income speaks to me because it allows for that sort of flexibility. And I wonder how... articulate a job guarantee for me in a way that is in that frame and not in the frame of the sort of old school way of doing it where you go to work 9 to 5, 5 days a week, and then you clock out and blah, 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 which just isn't how a lot of people, I think, live or want to live at the moment, but which is, I think, maybe more fitting for a job guarantee, or maybe I'm wrong. So anyway, speak to that.
I want to take it?
I'll go first.
Okay, go first.
So, Jesse, you're not representative of everybody.
I know.
There is intrinsic value in a job. There are plenty of unemployed people, when polled, would like to be working and doing something that they may consider productive, right? So there are some people who really want that. I think that the conversation we're having about freedom, about basic income giving you that ability to make choices, that's really about assets and wealth, right? If you really want freedom and you want to talk about ability to make choices in your life, it's not income. Income meets your day-to-day needs. Wealth is the thing that allows you to be transformative, to come up with a new profession, to move from project to project. And I think, again, a policy that Sandy and I have been talking about, we call them baby bonds, where imagine every child is endowed with an account at birth, and that account will be progressively funded, so that if you're from the most wealth-poor family, you can get upwards of $50,000 in the account, and if you're the son of Oprah Winfrey, you can get a nominal account of, say, $500. With the right, I won't get into all the details. The average account could be $20,000. Now, we can add a layer of paternalism into it to be protective of people's assets by saying that money, when you become an adult, gets used towards some asset-enhancing endeavor, like a debt-free education, the purchase of a home, a seed capital for a new business. I think the key element is we need programs to give every American some seed capital. We can think about that seed capital as in the form of public assets. So if we had a system where higher education was free at the point of delivery for all Americans, that could be an example of a public asset that could be used towards giving people freedom and choices. But if we don't want to go that route, we can give people private accounts. but we need some mechanism, some policy. I'll say this last thing, which is rhetorical, a soundbite. A capitalist society where large segments of the population lack capital is a cruel society that just locks in inequality.
Universal seed money, we can call it venture communism.
As long as Jesse is the spokesperson, we'll never get the policies passed.
Well, all right. I can't top that, but I don't have a cool quote. But here's how I think about it. So you say this is the kind of economy we live in. Like this, we have to give this up. Like just because this is the kind of economy we live in doesn't mean we can't have a different economy. So like a lot of the conversation about basic income is like, well, there simply aren't enough jobs. There simply aren't good jobs. There simply aren't 95 jobs, and I don't want that's fine. But let's, we can create enough jobs, right? That's basically the one aspect. So part of the freedom would be, yes, assets, but also the ability to move from job to job. And I like the Beveridge, the great British social reformer definition. There should be more vacancies than are job seekers. So in a sense, you could have labor mobility, genuine labor mobility, when there are plenty of things to do in the public sector that may seem desirable. But also the public sector sets the standard. They can define what a job is. I've seen how the Argentina did their job guarantee program, and people propose their own projects, and they determine their own hours, and many of them worked many more hours than they were paid for, and they got seed money precisely to buy some capital, like sewing machines or just some other basic things where they started their own businesses. So this is the best kind of microfinance. It's a grant. It's not a loan where you have to repay, the money. It's seed money that gets you off your feet. Not everybody's going to be an entrepreneur, and not everybody's going to have a successful business, but people would like to still work. We can give them various options in the public sector. The other thing is about polls is that polls show that income is important, but it's not nearly as important all the way on the top of reasons why people like to work. Doing something is super important for most people, and being part of a community, working in learning things. So I think, like income, the one poll that I'm referring to in Argentina was like the fifth or seventh thing that people liked so many other aspects of these kind of projects. So I think that, there could be many jobs for you, Joseph, that you might like to do.
Just a plug for Pavlina's work on the JEFES program in Argentina, which you should look up, and also her short paper at the Levy Institute called Full Employment Through Social Entrepreneurship, where she sort of fleshes out this idea, not fully, but briefly, of communities proposing and designing their own projects and then getting funding from the federal government, which, as she mentioned, is not budget constrained in the same way as other political and corporate entities are. So highly recommend
on that, actually. Yeah. So I guess I'm just curious, because that sounds a lot kind of like a basic income to me, frankly. If you're like proposing your own project, you're coming up with the sort of impetus and basically doing what you want with a grant. Like that sounds sort of like, a basic income in a lot of ways. And I do think like there's a sort of sense that like, oh, well, if you give people a basic income, they're just gonna like sit around, and that's bad. And I think both, like on the one hand, like, well, if people like, I don't want to sort of say it like, well, that's like the worst thing that you can do. But like also, I do think that, I think you're right that people want to contribute to the communities in ways, but I guess I don't see why providing income would stop people from doing that, right? Like it seems like that is also, I guess, like again, this is like a definition: is it a job or is it a basic income grant? And some of that also comes down to like where we're deciding which projects are viable, and okay, you get the grant, or you get the grant and then you can decide for yourself which projects you want to partake in or your community can. So I guess I think like here again, like I feel like sometimes the discussion is really definitional in some way, and maybe calling it a job is a better like political strategy, and that just may be the case. But I do think that sometimes these things like it's very blurry what the boundaries are.
I mean, so there are probably slight differences in the way we envision the way it would actually work. The way I see it is that, well, the program acts as a mediator amongst us all on what our policy priorities are and how we can collectively achieve them. So in some sense, there has to be a conversation about, what do we need to do first? The environmental problems? Do we need to, clean up the Hudson River? What exactly do we need to do? And there has to be a vehicle, an institution that propels this conversation. Providing just a check to people doesn't really kickstart that conversation. It might help my community and my friends with our community garden and all of that, but it might not help the other, communities that don't even have these resources to they don't even know where to begin, right? So that's how I see the program as this place to come and to truly nurture participation, rather than allow on communities to, some will be very effective and others will still not be able to build the assets that they will need.
Yeah, I mean, I agree. There's public goods that aren't being produced by the private sector, both in terms of physical infrastructure as well as human capital infrastructure. I think childcare is a great example in the sense that people pay high prices for oftentimes low quality childcare. Why can't we have a first-rate childcare system for everybody, right? Have universal access. One other point I wanted to make is that, Jesse, when you started off with the question, I just want to add some clarity. The way we conceive of the federal job guarantee is federally financed. It has to be at the federal level, but the distribution does not necessarily have to come from the federal level. There could be programs set up where local communities can appeal to the federal government for the ability to distribute these jobs, for example. You could have a system designed where nonprofits could even be the distributor, as well as state and local governments, of whatever might be needed for particular communities.
I like that on the days when I like a job guarantee more than a basic income. It's that sort of coordinating factor.
Yeah.
There's a good analogy for it in Megan Erickson's Jacobin release, whose title I'm totally forgetting. What's it called? Class War. Where she sort of contrasts the sort of Montessori, Waldorf kind of like hyper individualized, do whatever you want model of education, which I actually have quite a bit of regard for, with public education, because in public education you have to learn to cooperate. You have to learn that like sometimes the whole class has to shut up and like it's time, like there's like a kind of like social cohesion to it that I think is. I think in that analogy, a basic income is much more the sort of Waldorf to the job guarantees public school. I want to ask one more question about JG, and then we can open it up to everybody. And the question is about work hours, because for like a century and a half, a primary socialist goal was less work. And I wonder what you imagine the mechanism, like would these be unionized workers, these job guarantee workers? Or what mechanisms do you imagine? Like let's say we had a job guarantee tomorrow. If there were a job guarantee that enshrined 40-hour work week for all the job guarantee recipients, I would take it tomorrow. But is there what can you imagine as a mechanism for shortening work hours as, let's say, automation takes care of more and more functions in society to progress toward a more leisureful society? Or is that a priority for you?
Yeah, I mean, I absolutely, these are not competing at all, and in fact, we should be working less. We're completely overworked, without a doubt. What's interesting is that government policies usually set the standard for the private sector. Wage policy is very clear. How pay practices in the public sector are, picked up emulated by the private sector. So the same thing with working hours. Pay a living wage for a 35-hour week. Let that be, sort of the sanctioned full employment, plus guaranteed vacation, some other benefits, health benefits, retirement benefits, and that was one big complaint of the Argentinians. They said, we're working here, but we don't get Social Security. You basically provide the package that has to be then matched by the private sector.
I mean, public sector jobs provide some of the better working conditions compared to the private sector jobs. So I certainly agree that it provides...
Partly because of unions.
Well, this is the second part. Unions aren't prohibited under the job guarantee. So if there are public sector unions that need to form, they form. So there are two layers of accountability, at least in theory. There are the possibility for labor bargaining through unions, but the government is, in theory, supposed to be accountable to the people. They're elected officials, and it's supposed to be the people's government. So that's another layer of accountability that's not in the private sector, by which we could set a floor on working conditions to sanction the private sector to at least provide what the federal government provides.
Excellent. Is
Yeah,
there?
one last
Oh,
thing.
please.
You know, when we talk about health insurance reform, for example, the public option, right? So this is an implicit public option, right? So if the federal job guarantee provides health insurance in the same way that other public sector employees get health insurance, that curtails the need for health insurance reform, right? There's an implicit floor on what you.
Backdoor single payer. Is there, Colin, is there a way that we want to kind of solicit questions, or do you want to be in charge of the mic?
The ideal would be for people to come up to the front to grab the mic, but don't bring it ahead of the speakers. But I realize things are a little tight, so if you do need to ask questions in the back, just shout it right out.
Or just if you can repeat it.
Oh,
the
that's
question.
fine. I'll be the least able to hear. I'll do my best. Turn on my spidey hearing.
Yeah, all the way in the back.
I think I'm a teacher, so I can spell the question. So real quick, I always wanted to explain, I guess, the cultural angle. And so I'm just curious, what kind of cultural change would be necessary for a nation like ours, which is very individualistic, definitely in some ways addicted and tortured by the work, to be able to accept something like the basic income? And just the two subsets of that is, I really appreciate that you brought up the issue, say, of race. There's a really good book by Mark Gillian, talks about the undeserving and deserving poor, and how the image of the deserving poor is a kind of white, hardworking, male, really, the undeserving poor, urban Latino, urban black, etc. And so, you know, there's the racial sediment, right? And then the other one is just, you know, there's always this idea of the Marxist dream of a non-alienated world, specifically non-alienated labor. Obviously, usually kind of positioned as creativity. So I just wonder, with those in mind, how do you envision, not just the economics, which I really appreciate the precision of it and your careful, meticulous accounting of it, but just like what's the cultural vision that allows for us to even accept what technology has made available?
So the culture, it sounds like you're asking about the cultural change on both ends, both the cultural change that would be necessary to implement one of these programs or both of these programs, and then the cultural changes that would result, like the reduction in alienation or the progression toward fully automated luxury communism, so-called.
Want me to go first? So I think the cultural change really has to be with regards to the conversation, the discourse, right? That's what's necessary. We need to get out of the dogma of markets being supreme no matter what the outcome is. It's wrong. It's not empirically substantiated. People just say things. They say things like with no accountability, right? Black people are lazy, right? What gives you the information that black people have ever been lazy, right? We could find anecdotes anytime, but it's without rigor, those anecdotes or those cases. So the way we have to culturally change that is one, keep beating them with evidence, right? When we cite the statistics, I think wealth becomes some of the primary evidence to cite when we talk about how people, this system of meritocracy is not really driving people's outcomes, right? We often think of things going into wealth like education, income leading to wealth, when a lot of times it's the other way around. Having wealth leads to those better outcomes. So this becomes some of our strong ammunition. So we need to change that discourse. I think that's the most important thing we can do.
Yeah, and I will only add, and you need a political strategy. Maybe the culture won't change. You know, you won't have the full prerequisites for the culture to change to be behind the program. But then what we have seen is that people get behind these programs once they see how they work.
I mean, there have been polls taken when framed a certain way that close to half Americans would support something like a federal job guarantee.
Yeah.
Right.
or more actually.
More than
more
50.
like when Jesse did his piece in the Rolling Stone, like the 5 proposals. I should say that the job guarantee was well ahead of the income guarantee, and you framed it as a social security, which is a very popular program. So if you had framed it as a universal basic income, I'm curious. But then there were the Gallup, Russell Sage, and a bunch of others had 58% to all the way to 77%.
The Progressive Change Campaign Committee or whatever
Yeah.
had 77.
And they asked the question, what if the federal government funded it? Like, if they had appropriated a budget. So they asked it without it, and then with it, because often when people, hear government budgets, they're like, oh, you're going to explode the debt and all of these myths out there that we can't afford it. The support was equal.
I think it's a great question, and I think it sort of points to this interesting tension where I think the cultural changes you're talking about point in sort of different directions for these in some sense, and that I think the questions around the undeserving and the deserving poor, which are very racialized, tend to favor that kind of cultural sense that we have tends to favor something like a job guarantee, which at least has a sense that you you do some honest work for your money. You're not just getting something for nothing. You're not just lazing around or whatever. And so I think that piece of the cultural, I guess, and I agree that I think that political strategy will sort of probably have to preempt a total cultural shift, but still I think the cultural, I guess, dynamics of both of these are difficult, but I do think that they sort of tend towards, or are more favorable for something like a job guarantee because of all these questions around work ethic that you raise. But then, of course, that points in the opposite direction of this idea of unalienated labor that you are sort of, or that, I think the job, not that all work. And I think there are elements of the job guarantee that are trying to push against that and to sort of say that people are can choose together or coordinate together some sort of socially valuable work. But I think still the job that you have to go to is going to be in some ways it is always alienated, and maybe that's not always bad. I think that there are some good things about alienated labor is not always the greatest demon. But I certainly think that is one of the things that is also appealing about basic income as a sort of aspirational cultural change or something. But yeah, I think it's tricky to navigate that. And I think one thing that's interesting in terms of thinking about the sort of, I guess, cultural framing or something of basic income, it's interesting that framing the job guarantee as Social Security is that what you said?
Basically.
Oh, okay, right. Yeah, I was gonna say, yeah, that's okay, right. I was gonna say that seems like a strange. That seems much more like basic income, right? Yeah. Okay. So, but I guess one of the ways it's often been framed as or implemented is through resource wealth. So in America, Alaska is the sort of paradigmatic case, I guess, where Alaskan oil wealth is, everyone gets a dividend from that. A lot of the stuff happening in Southern Africa is tied to mineral wealth and some sense that this belongs to all the people. And I think that has a slightly different dynamic than or I guess there's a sort of the initial thought is that we all own this thing, we all own this resource, it is a shared common resource, and so we are getting our share of it rather than we deserve this or not based on some sense of whether you've worked enough for it or whether you've produced enough to get it. And so I think that's really interesting, and particularly coming from a sort of environmental justice perspective, I think, there's the problem being that it tends to be tied to extractive industry, obviously, incentivizes more extractive activity, but I think there are also ways to tie it to something carbon tax or to shared commons that are, that we say okay, we all own, the atmosphere, and any sort of any tax on polluting the atmosphere should go to the people who share an ownership of that. So I think there's some interesting ways that so potentially thinking about getting or having a different cultural sense around what this dessert is and what we should get from the things that we collectively do our own.
I'd just like to put in a word for the best thing I know about that can change cultural conditions and shift the terrain of what is politically possible at the highest levels, which is social movements. I don't think that we would see anything like the traction that the Sanders campaign is getting without having been preceded by Occupy Wall Street. I think the movement for Black Lives is shifting the cultural terrain of, especially I think that simply the claim that Black Lives Matter confronts in a really earnest way a lot of the sort of racist ideology that we were talking about earlier as a big impediment. So I think that these things, the climate movement, the immigration justice movement, has obviously had enormous political effects. So mass movements that center on direct action, I think, are our best hope for shifting that kind of cultural terrain. Other questions? I'm being deliberately progressive about this. Yeah, right there. Nope, yeah. Mm-hmm.
Hi. My name is Diane, and I'm actually one of the founding members of Basic Income Action, which was launched September 17th, and I'm really happy to be here. And I wanted to just point out something that is a concern of mine, but also something about basic income, which is Melissa had said, made a comment about not having some reservations about creating a basic income that would be a check with no questions asked, giving somebody a check with no questions asked. And actually that is, in its purest form, that is what the basic income is, and it is what the movement is about. I realize that there's some variations, but I want to just say that in terms of giving people the income rather than a system that guarantees a job or some other good or service, that with the basic income, when you give someone income, you're offering freedom, but you're also offering something else, which is faith. Faith in that that person can be part of a collective, can make individual decisions that make sense, can be productive without someone creating a system and overseeing them. And so I just wanted to make sure that that's in the mix of what we're thinking of, because it's so important to the concept of basic income. And then the other thing that I just wanted to also put into the mix is just, we want to be really careful when we're talking about unemployment, because unemployment tends to be a male term. It is based on a traditional model of people giving their labor and getting a wage, whereas typically women, or anyone, male or female, who does care work in their home, caring for their own children rather than doing childcare, that person is being productive. They are participating. They're just not getting the income. So please let's be careful when we say that people are unemployed. It doesn't always mean what we think it means. And that's it. And thanks so much for putting this together.
That's a good note. Can we talk about valorizing domestic work and childcare? I think of a locally run job guarantee as accommodating like babysitting circles, for instance, or like domestic work co-ops or something like
It's
that.
exactly what happened in Argentina. Like people, created their jobs projects, and then right next door there was like a daycare center, or it was in proximity to a daycare center. And like moms and dads, they equally said it wasn't just moms. I can go and see my kids for lunch. It's right here. I don't have to commute an hour. Pick up my kid and then go back to my factory job, etc. So there are a couple of things. When we say unemployment, we just are talking about somebody who wants a job and can't find one. That's it. A simple definition, man or woman. Now, the job guarantee envisions support for unpaid, what is now unpaid work, right? Household work or any other socially useful work that is not commodified. And so like a universal child allowance to me is an essential prerequisite to add on to the benefit package. Then the other thing is that, I think this is where the question is, you give a check, no questions asked, and then that allows people freedom to X, Y, and Z. This is what I question. We're talking about substantive freedom. We are talking about not just the ability to spend your dollars, but we're talking about the removal of obstacles and empowering you to do X, Y, and Z. So when you talk about the universal basic income, I almost see that there has to be something else. Like there's gotta be the how. Like how do people actually, fulfill their own destinies? Like what would the market do that is not already doing to provide them with what they need? Like, the market is not going to solve those problems. It's not going to solve the multiple aspects of economic insecurity, even if you provide the check. So we need the institution, and that's why, I think that it's not just freedom. You're looking for substantive freedom. And that's, following Amartya Sen and Martha Nussbaum, it follows 3 criteria. You recognize what people want, and it's not just income. Then you provide those opportunities. Maybe they want jobs, maybe they want decent childcare, maybe whatever. And then you remove obstacles from taking advantage of those opportunities. Provide the job in close proximity. Provide the public transportation so that people can take advantage of that economic opportunity, and on and on. So I think even freedom needs to be thought of as a more broad context.
So I want to give 3 points in response. 1, the federal job guarantee would be inclusive of things like child care and elder care and are meant to provide public provisions that eliminate barriers that might have traditionally led to inequities around gender lines or racial lines. I'd also add that the federal job guarantee is intended to help remove stigma for stigmatized groups. If you were formerly incarcerated, you would have right to a guaranteed job. If you're black and facing labor market discrimination, you'd have right to a guaranteed job. If you are a woman and face labor market discrimination, if you are of a certain sexual orientation, whatever, the job guarantee is, as it says, a guarantee. And that not only gives them access to jobs in the public sector, it should sanction the private sector as well. The last point I want to make is that with regards to basic income, if it does not have a progressive component, I'm actually against it. I'm against it because I think it will, 1, be potentially inflationary and not have the real impacts that we might desire for it to be. And 2, I think this is a far worse concern, is that it might actually exacerbate inequality for a lot of the reasons that you brought up in your presentation, which is you might very well be diverting more resources to people that have greater means to build up even larger inequalities or structures that perpetuate their hierarchical position on the class ladder.
Just to give an example, I completely agree. If you provide $20,000 check to everybody, what is the wealthiest person going to do? They're going to put it in their stock portfolio, right? And it earns interest and interest on interest and interest. So, but the poor is going to try to get food that maybe became more expensive now, and rent, right? That is now a little more expensive. So there are inequities there.
So someone referred to it as a democracy of consumers and an aristocracy of producers.
That's a nice way to present it. I mean, you can also think about who owns the means of production. So when people think about trade models, sometimes just giving a developing country a cash transfer without elevating their means of production actually could lead to immiserating growth, where they might grow, but the other country will grow at a faster rate. So if certain populations don't own the means of production and you stimulate the economy in a nominal way, then you very well could exacerbate inequality. So that's a concern.
Can I ask you to weigh in on the question of valorizing invisible work? I know that we were at a conference that Derek was also at, where you spoke on a panel with Kathy Weeks, who focuses on this a lot, and I just wonder what your remarks are on that.
Yeah, I guess I think that this is, I guess, again, one of the appeals of basic income for me, is that I think that, while I appreciate that, I think job guarantee can also, is in a progressive form, oriented towards supporting a lot of kinds of work that are currently under-recognized or invisible. I do think that this discussion just highlights like how, unclear, I guess, the line between waged work and unwaged work, recognized work and unrecognized work, visible labor and invisible labor is, and I think there are many kinds of activities that go into again, social reproduction, to recreating our and sustaining our communities, and some of those can be, I think, easily identified and turned into jobs and sort of like treated as such, and some of them can, and I think that a basic income does, I think, recognize that there are many ways that we all are contributing to our communities, even if we don't have a socially recognized job, and that I think does try to, in some ways, combat the stigma. I mean, ideally, I guess, would try to combat the stigma also of not having a traditional job, and I think that I mean, of course, it's not enough alone. Like, I don't think that I guess in response to the initial question, which I hope I didn't say that I think the idea of the basic income is a check that is no strings attached in terms of being given out. If I said that it was a mistake, I meant to say a check that has that is intended to replace other forms of like public provision, which I don't. That is what I wouldn't support, is the check that's sort of like, okay, here's your $20,000 a year, but there's no
Go buy healthcare with it.
Go buy healthcare, go buy a car, or what, there's no more like any sort of other public provision, and so of course, like, we need many other things to enable us to have substantive freedom. I don't disagree with that in the slightest, and I think things like the means of production, I don't disagree here. I don't necessarily see that like a job guarantee is seizing the means of production either, except for the ones that the federal government already controls. But I do, I think that the aspiration is to recognize that there are many forms of labor that we, I think we're seeing this all the time now, where you see actually like on the left like a tendency to name new forms of labor, whether it's even the sort of like wages for Facebook kind of tongue in cheek, but also trying to name something that we are all sort of in our daily lives producing value for capital, and that like many of the activities that we just sort of like do are like creating value somewhere. And I think trying to recognize that in some way that isn't just saying like, okay, now like here's $1 for every Facebook post you put up, because that's building an online community or just creating money for Facebook or whatever. I think this is sort of the impetus behind what I think of, at least, of a sort of idea of basic income and its merits.
With regards to the ownership of the means of production, the Alaska model that you brought up is actually quite interesting, because it's not simply that Alaska gets oil royalties and then out of, just collects that pool of money and then pays it out every year. It's that with that pool of money, it buys stocks and bonds. It collectivizes ownership, small claims on ownership of the means of production, and then out of that fund, out of the dividends and interest that fund earns, then pays out.
That's not an advantage of the program. It's the fact that it buys stocks and bonds only perpetuates a highly financialized society and an ever-increasing money manager capitalism. You don't want to tie your well-being to the financial sector. You have to divorce it.
Well, those of you clapping, think about what you mean by collectivizing ownership of the means of production, because ownership of the means of production is represented in capital stock, in stocks. And if it's a sovereign wealth fund owning those stocks, that is the public.
Maybe it was long ago when the stock market served the purpose of raising funds for capital. Now, stock market exists for its own sake. It does not. It doesn't raise any funds. It doesn't finance productive activity.
Shout out to Doug Henwood's book Wall Street, which is the best investigation of that.
I can jump in and see from the audience response. I can say something that might be somewhat popular for the federal job guarantee. The automatic stabilizing provision of it would basically reduce the need of the federal government to have to bail out the financial sector the next time the Wall Street cowboys want to go roughshod. And right, if we have a federal job guarantee, that would reduce the need to have to bail out the financial sector because of the fear that the person on Main Street might suffer if we have a collapsed financial sector.
Yeah.
wasn't as popular as I thought it
Yes. Hi. So I had a question about the point you just made a few minutes ago about how a basic income would have to be progressive, I think was the word used. The meaning being that you would give more money to people who are poorer and less money or no money to people who are richer instead of giving a flat rate to everybody. And I had a few questions about that. So one is, wouldn't doing it that way necessitate a set of kind of inefficient means testing wherein not only would it make the whole process more complicated and probably less efficient, but it would also make it so that people who were in higher income brackets had some notion that they earn their money and they're richer, whereas poorer people are dependent and ask themselves, like, why should they get this thing for free? Whereas if everyone is getting the exact same size check, then A, it's perfectly egalitarian and no one can say that, but B, the less money you have to begin with, the more relative value you get from that check. And then finally, why can't we just tax the rich a lot more to pay for all of this and then make it a form of redistribution that way? What's done about all the things that I said?
No, okay, let me go with the tax question. Please, money doesn't grow on rich people. They have a lot of it, but it doesn't come from them. When the government sector wants to pay for a program, they pass a budget. They appropriate it, and the Fed pays. They never bounce a government check. When you pay your taxes at the federal level, I don't want to get too technical, reserves get debited, they disappear from the system. There isn't a big giant vault that collects your tax dollars that's locked up there, and then the government goes and digs up money to spend. So it's all about policy priorities. The federal government spends in its own resource. If you want to sell it that way, let's tax the rich people to pay for the poor, we will lose every time, because the rich people have power, they have resources, and they will convince X, Y, and Z that there's not enough money, right? And we have just run out of money for this very generous program. So you have to sell it on the right paradigm. We value it. We insist on this permanent program. The government has to commit to it, period. And the other issue is that I agree on the aspect that programs have to be universal. I mean, Derek can talk about the progressive aspects. The way I see the progressive aspect of the basic income is if it is tied to participation in public goods provisioning directly. That whatever you're providing income for, you're at the same time providing the things that people need, and you're bringing them into the fold in the process of their own provisioning. That's the inherent connection that I see. So I wouldn't actually favor a more generous income support for the poor, less generous because it's just going to be another welfare program. That's how it's going to be sold. It's not going to survive.
So we disagree.
You guys are supposed to be on a team against.
We need tax reform in this country. I agree that well, I don't disagree with you on the point of we can pay for it. We have the means to pay for it. I agree with that. But in addition to that, we do need tax reform because we subsidize the wealthy with our tax code by way of different tax rates on capital gains versus income, being mortgage interest deduction. Most people don't itemize their tax forms, so they miss out on a lot of the benefits of the mortgage interest deduction, for example. We spend about $500 billion subsidizing assets through things like mortgage interest deduction, differences in capital gains. The problem is how that money is distributed, not the dollar value. The top 5% receive, I think about, the top 5%, I think this is accurate, I'm pretty sure, about 60% of the benefit. The bottom 60% of tax filers receive about 5% of the benefit. So that pot of money needs to be redistributed in a more fair way where Americans are getting access to it. But that's separate from how if and how we can finance things like a basic income or federal job guarantee. But I do hold firm that if you don't have the progressive element to something like a basic income, you are actually going to exacerbate inequality for all the reasons I named. I'm happy to name them again, but it would be problematic.
When you say progressive, is that different from means testing, or does it just sound better?
It sounds better, but there's going to be some criteria based on the position in which you are in. Right? So
why can't the benefit be flat and uniform for getting the same amount of money from the government, but the more money you earn, the higher.
So it nets out to means testing.
So it's well, but in a kind of a, it seems fair. Everyone is getting the same size check.
Isn't that kind of what a negative income tax is?
That is. I mean,
But it's
now
conditional.
semantic. We're talking, right, what's the difference between a transfer and a tax payment? In my Econ 101 class, it's a negative sign versus a positive sign, right? Taxes and transfers are just the flip side of each other. So I guess in theory, we can come up with a mechanism where the tax code is so progressive that we can just give everybody a flat basic income. In that sense, I'm not opposed to it. But.
No, okay, so I have to interject again. Tax the rich, right? Tax them not because you want to balance some other account. Tax them because their income causes misallocation of resources, because their income causes inequality, financial instability, misery. That's the reason why you tax them, for the real resources, not because we don't have money. So they have to be separate. We don't need to do this weird accounting where money goes from here and goes from here. You're going to have a deficit and you're going to have a surplus depending on how the economy is doing. They're two separate forces, they're independent from each other, and it's just an accounting result.
Let's see. We've got 2 minutes until 9, so let's take one last question, and then we'll, right there in the corner.
Hi. I want to take this on a more international scale now, because obviously the U.S. doesn't function as like a closing starter.
Oh, you can use the mic.
Yeah. And so I guess one question would be like, what do you think the effects international would be of like basic income? Like, would it exacerbate like imperialism? And maybe a second question, which for me is more important, is like, what is the role of like international anti-imperialist struggles in terms of like, I don't know, getting their own national liberation from the U.S. Because my understanding is that we're talking about this income within the United States.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I've thought a little bit about the international implication. So you're going to get a basic income here in the US, and a lot of the bad jobs are going to disappear, but they're going to go to China. So the stuff that we buy with our basic income is going to be produced by some slave labor somewhere else, right? So it's going to have some of these kind of implications because our consumption is going to go up, and we've outsourced the jobs, but they won't really come back here. How do you empower countries? I actually see the job guarantee as empowering. You don't depend on shipping your resources to the United States to get their dollars to develop your own country. You just mobilize your domestic resources. Now, some countries are going to be resource poor. They'll have to buy capital. There will be some constraints in terms of resources. But you can always, in the domestic currency, buy labor within the country and provision, given your resources, still internally develop with your own internal currency. So you can create employment that is not dependent on international considerations.
Can I ask a little follow-up? Because you're from Bulgaria, is that right?
Originally
from
born
Bulgaria.
there, yeah.
So I want to ask about it in the European context where currencies are not sovereign.
Yep. They cannot do. I mean, they are.
There basically could be no job guarantee in, say.
They could be,
Italy.
but they cannot possibly fund. The way the euro works is, it's a perpetual deflationary environment. It's going to be much more unemployment, much more misery, and they don't have the funding mechanism to do euro-wide pro-growth policy. They don't have federal government. They don't have fiscal policy. The central bank does not fund individual governments, so it's a losing game. They have to reform it one way or another. They actually have a job guarantee. They have a youth job guarantee on the books, and then they tell the countries, we'll provide some seed money, but you have to fund it. Nobody's doing it, of course, because they are chasing austerity policies.
What about, Derek, the international implications?
Well, I agree. I'll answer that question with I agree. But I'll say that Tomas Piketty talked about an international tax on capital, and I dare say the word redistribution. So if we want a society that is inclusive regardless of national borders, we do need to think about capital flows and taxing that capital in some form of redistribution. You asked me the political question, I don't know the answer to it, but that's the mechanism.
Melissa?
I guess just first, I think, I think both of these, in terms of the sort of like, will our bad jobs go somewhere else? Like, well, that seems true of the job guarantee. Also, like, if part of the point is to improve quality of work and give people options to opt out of bad work. In either case, like, I think, the problem of like bad jobs going elsewhere is one, and that's one of all labor standards in a global economy. And like, I don't know that we can sort of solve that in one fell swoop. I'm curious, I wasn't quite sure what you meant by whether basic income would exacerbate like imperial projects.
Yeah.
I'm just not sure like how to respond, 'cause I'm not sure quite like how that would.
Yeah, I mean, like, my understanding of like the basic income is that it doesn't really necessarily mean that, like, say U.S. imperialism will like decrease or will be like completely gotten rid of, and so.
Yeah, I think that's totally fair. I don't think basic income will probably like banish imperialism. I think probably a job guarantee won't either. I think probably a lot of sort of like one-shot policies will not end U.S. imperialism. But again, as I was saying before, I do think there's a lot of the most interesting experimental politics around, I think, basic income are happening internationally in countries that have lost out in the sort of like global race for jobs, like in places where they don't even have the sort of like really terrible jobs of working in a sweatshop in China. Like, you don't have access even to those, and so I think there are a lot of places where the option where more people actually are on some sort of social grant or social benefit. It's not a basic income, but are receiving income through a social grant rather than through wage work. And so I think that is actually where we can, or should be looking. Like, I don't think there's an answer yet there, but I think that is like where this politics, I think, is really happening internationally, and sort of like new politics around distribution and what to do with, I think, or both redistribution and just generally distributive politics are playing out. So I think, it's still like, I think this is very nascent, but I don't, so it's not a cure for imperialism, but it might be an interesting new, like, I think that rather than sort of saying, I guess in the sense that rather than holding up like sort of U.S. and European like post-war social democracy as sort of like the end state that all countries will eventually achieve, there are I think the sort of beginning politics around basic income internationally are sort of often happening in places where that just seems completely infeasible, and so I guess that's it's a different model.
The Namibian example is particularly interesting and well worth looking into. I'll just mention one other thing on this question about a basic income and a job guarantee, which is that so much of the reason it seems to me that we continually make war is that the employment prospects for large swaths of our country rely on the military-industrial complex and the continual financing of new war production. Also prison industrial complex, the fossil fuel extraction industrial complex, all of these sectors in the American economy that provide millions and millions of jobs sort of necessitate the continual upkeep of the systems that do the employment. And so providing people with meaningful work that is not in those sectors takes the political pressure off of those and makes it so that you can shut down a prison, say, without devastating the community for whom the prison serves as an economic anchor, and same with like war production stuff in the states in the Great Plains and stuff where there isn't the big metropolises aren't really there, and a lot of the economy is based on building bombs and planes and stuff like that. Providing a job guarantee or a basic income relieves the pressure and sort of gives us a way into shutting down some of those operations. So that's just one idea.
I mean, the other thing that surprised it didn't, well, military might be the closest thing we have to a federal job guarantee in the country, kind of ironically. But the other point that I'm surprised didn't come up, and it's related to your question, is what about undocumented workers? Would they qualify for a basic income, or would they qualify for a federal job guarantee? So I guess I posed it, so the answer would be, I think we need comprehensive immigration reform, but I'm going to make the claim that perhaps they wouldn't, which Might have him talk.
Provocative. I'm going to just check with Colin real quick. My impulse is to take this last question, but we are at 9:07, so I pass the buck.
Okay, if there's one more burning question, we can take it. People are also welcome to stick around for a few more minutes, maybe one more quick glass of wine to talk a little bit more, and then we'll have to head out of respect to our hosts.
All right, so by show of twinkles, up or down, take this last question or cool it out? Nobody cares. Let's hear the question.
On the imperialism question and the job guarantee, when Coretta Scott King in the 1970s led the Full Employment Action Council, which was the largest group fighting for guaranteed jobs in the 1970s, she did it explicitly under an understanding that as she put it, we've never adequately dealt with the question of a peacetime economy. That, as Jesse was alluding to, the sort of Keynesianism that existed in the U.S. was always a military Keynesianism, and so in order to get out of that, you needed a job guarantee, and embedded within that struggle for a job guarantee was a call for a basic income, which, grew from Black freedom movements, 40 years before.
Splendid. What a great way to go out. Thank you for that. Thanks, everyone, for coming. Thank you for putting this on. Thanks to Verso and Jacobin and Dissent and the New Economy Coalition. Let's get drunk.